Hi, everyone. As we wait for you all to come in, we're just going to make everyone super jealous by letting you know where Tanner went to spend his summer. Where did you go this summer?
So this summer, I actually, it's a small backstory. We were in between homes, or we were going to be in between homes. I decided rather than couch surfing at my in-laws' house that I wanted to go somewhere. So me and my family actually we rented an Airbnb in Oahu on the North Shore for about 6 weeks. So we actually just moved to Hawaii for the summer. So not a bad place to be.
Very cool. Very jealous. I wish I had that experience, but I just went to Chicago for a week. Very cool, but definitely not Hawaii.
You can't dog around Chicago too much though. Chicago was I was just there a couple weeks ago. It's a cool city.
It is. It's cool. Very cool. Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited to be talking about building a culture of motivation and setting expectations. It's been a super challenging year, even if you had a really awesome vacation in Hawaii. But we're just excited to talk about some of the ways that we can keep our teams excited throughout the rest of the year and even beyond that. So let's get started. This event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. If you're not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is what we call the world's largest revenue leadership community for folks in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and beyond. And our mission is to create an environment for our large membership to answer questions they might otherwise struggle to answer on their own. And we do that through amazing live sessions like what you're at here today, through our awesome online forum, and hopefully in the near future, in-person events. And if you're not a member, we're going to go ahead and add you after today so you're not missing out. And if you like this content, you're going to love our Revenue Excellence Summit that's happening so soon, October 12th through 14th. I'm popping a link right here so you can make sure that you get yourself registered. We're going to be talking about annual planning, talking about the people, the process, and the technology that you need to get ready for 2022. Tanner here will be doing an awesome masterclass, so we hope to see you there and you can see him again. Enough about MSP. Let's talk about Spiff, who sponsored this session. It would not be possible without them. So Tanner, can you give us a little spiel on Spiff? Ooh, that's a tongue twister.
Yeah, I'd love to. So Spiff, for those of you who don't know who we are, what we do, Spiff is a modern compensation platform, and our focus is adding visibility and enablement around sales compensation. So we aim to, again, decrease the friction, automate the entire sales compensation process, and then add the needed insights, reporting, and visibility across the board so that your team can build trust and that commissions can be motivating for the organization. So I always see a lot more than that. Happy to answer any questions specifically if you have them, but just a quick overview of Spiff right there.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that you popped in motivation because that's what we're talking about today. But we're really excited to have you here. You've been on so many of these MSP events and it's great working with you. But tell everyone a little bit about yourself and why you're so stoked about motivation.
Yeah, I mean, motivation is, and culture even, is just something that I'm pretty passionate about. I think it's something that's often like overlooked. I think it's something that, oh, you beat me to it. I was going to post my LinkedIn. Thing. I had it all ready and queued up. So I'll delete that. But it's something that's I think really important. I spent most of my career at this point understanding sales compensation, how it works, how it doesn't work, and different things you can do with it. So as far as my background, I've co-founder at Spiff, done a little bit of everything. So we were there when there was no one else, even before the product. So it's been fun to see our product and the space grow. And then throughout that time, I've learned a lot. So excited to be diving into this today with you.
Awesome. All right, let's jump into some housekeeping stuff really quick before we get started. First of all, this event is being recorded, so you will have access to it. I'm going to work my butt off to make sure you get it as soon as possible by the end of today, and you'll be able to see the key takeaways. You can share it with your colleagues as well. Second, please ask us any questions. I'm popping in the chat now if you want to use the Q&A or you just want to use the chat panel to make some jokes, talk about, where you went on vacation as well, but mostly to ask us questions about motivation. Please do that. We love our events to be super engaging and interactive. So let's dive in. Tanner, I know you want to talk about motivation, but first you want to talk about defining culture, like what it even means to have culture before you can build a culture of motivation. So let's do that.
Cool. Yeah. So I have like this, I realized as I've been giving these presentations that I have a really bad habit of using like sports quotes and different things like that inside my presentations. And unfortunately, even though I'm working on it, I'm going to give one today that I actually think is like, doesn't need to be sports, but it's from Vince Lombardi, one of the best football coaches of all time, where he used to always first practice of every year of his championship teams would come back, and like the first thing he would do is like hold up a football, showing all these people whose whole careers are playing football, and would say, "Gentlemen, this is a football," right? And what he was doing there is he was breaking it down. He was focusing, keeping it simple. And like today, I wish I had a little bit more, but I'm not going to like break down any like revolutionary concepts for you today. Something that's going to like blow your mind on this data that I collected or that we collected. But what I want to do is actually take the basics and to dive into them, because I think like it's easy to say what it is. It's a lot harder to actually do, right? Or to like, we don't often take those basics and actually dissect them a little bit more. And before we can even talk about like building a culture of motivation, I want to talk about what culture is. And I'm going to be honest, I tend to like have a little bit of a different view on company culture and healthy company culture than most of my millennial friends here. I'm proud millennial. And like, I want to start with a really interesting story. And for me, and guys, I know we actually have a pretty like intimate group here on this webinar today. So I'd love to make this as much Q&A as possible. So please interrupt us with chats and Q&A as we're going through this. But the story came from a family member who's a lifetime human resources leader. So this individual, about 7-8 years ago, this company was blowing up. They had like this award-winning culture, and because they were growing so fast, they built a new building. So the old building was cramped. It was tight as far as space goes. It was awesome. It was like people had been working there for like 15 years, but it was time to grow, and it was exciting. It should have been something exciting. So this family member spent a lot of time building and prepping this new building. Super excited about getting there, had a way bigger gym, brand new cafeteria, way more open, like really modern looking. And he was met by a lot of complaints when they moved over, because it was seen as, this is not our culture, right? This building doesn't define our culture. And it was really interesting. And my favorite part of this story is at one point, he was telling me that in their last building, in an effort to like make it comfortable for everybody, they actually would go buy like the 12-ply toilet paper, or like the top of the line, whatever it is, and they would put it in the bathrooms for people. Well, when they went to the new building, it wasn't like the toilet paper holders weren't quite big enough to hold that toilet paper anymore. And so they just went to Costco and got like the 4, whatever, like still really nice toilet paper, nicer than any office I've ever worked in. And he was met by someone who actually brought a roll of toilet paper, knocked on his door, and said, "This is not our company culture." Holding something in new toilet paper. I want to call this out now, that company culture is not toilet paper. And if you want to move on this next one, Taylor, like company culture is not your 401k match. It's not free snacks or food. It's not your gym membership. Culture is not the results of that. Culture is the base level of what you believe in and what you're working towards. So your shared goals, vision, your camaraderie, your teamwork, the success that you're sharing, the motivation that you feel from that is the culture. A lot of the times I like to think about it as if you're going somewhere. So I actually spent 2 years living in Jamaica. And as much as I would like to say that jerk chicken is Jamaican's culture, it's not. It's a product of that, right? The culture is the patriotism that they have. It's the events. It's like the love for track and field, even, right? Like I'm like being biased because of the or the love for football or soccer. That has a lot more to do with what their culture is, because it's something they share. It's something that's good, and then other things come from that. So like, as we talk about a culture of motivation, I want you guys to make sure we have that baseline of like what culture is. And I'm not saying that things like 401k match, free snacks, gym memberships aren't great. I think they are, and I think that this isn't an excuse for leadership to not have those type of things. I just think they are, again, a result of a great culture, not necessarily the definition.
Mm-hmm.
So Taylor, let's I don't know, what are your thoughts on there? Sorry, I talked a lot there. Taylor, you should
No,
make sure you tell me to shut up too.
no, that was great. I think something that came up for me is when you were talking about, they had this vision and this vision was their building. And you're saying like the company culture didn't show up in that building. How do you maintain culture as you grow and you scale? Like you're wanting to look more towards the future, but you're also wanting to keep the core of yourself, right? Like how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I don't know that there's a perfect answer to that. My default answer on something like this is you have to instill that in your management team, right? So as you get bigger, like it tends to be pretty easy for founders and for CEOs to like have their vision and to work towards it. Once you get bigger than 10, 15, 20 people though, like you have to find ways to manage that culture and the actual drive and maintain that definition through your management team. So they need to be enabled to talk through it. They're the frontline employees need to feel enabled to bring up concerns. Like in no way was I trying to like make fun of the person who was concerned around like the toilet paper in the new building, right? But like it was just an example of like it's beyond the point, right? Like
Right.
you grow this company, you build this thing, you like can afford this great new big building that has all these awesome amenities, but we're focused on like a piece of that, right? And it's like what you can do. What I believe actually happened in there is like you just have to sit down and talk about like why do we even have this? Like why first off, like let's like you don't want to like there is also entitlement that can happen through this. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. So you have to be careful with that. But like if your culture is strong, the buy-ins there, the success and motivation, like people won't be quite as worried about that stuff. And so you just have to make sure you enable that, you build a culture and it's like enablement around what that culture is.
I like that. Writing that down. Well, do you want to dig in to kind of how you create that culture, what culture is, building that out? If you want to hit the
Yeah.
next slide.
Yep, let's do it.
Cool.
So perfect. So this so I was prepping for this today, and as we were going through this, I put down this 3-step, like I call it 3-step process, but I want to make sure that we put an asterisk that this is in no way like a cyclical thing. It doesn't have to be, right? Like a lot of times it happens that it's like pretty catchy for us to be like, hey, here's the 3 things you have to do to build this strong motivational culture. But in reality, like these are things that we should always be doing. It doesn't have to come one after the other. It's probably good to start in order, but once you get these things rolling, it's important to make sure that you're just keeping up on them when they occur, and that you're continually keeping up on them. So the 3 things that you need to keep in mind when you're trying to build a strong motivational culture is you need to set expectations. You need to have constant accountability, and you need to reward and acknowledge your people. So we'll dive into each of those a little bit deeper. And like some of these, like for example, setting expectations and accountability can oftentimes seem like counterintuitive to motivation, funny enough. But we'll dive into those. But I don't know, any thoughts there, Taylor?
No, I think that's great. I also love what you said, that it can kind of go out of order as well, but it's all sort of like magic, right? It's all connecting to one another and building towards that culture. All right, I'm gonna hit the next slide. Let's dig into it.
Let's do it. So first things first, like you have to set expectations if you want to build motivation. Like I don't know, maybe I'm off here, but like I can't tell you like one person that would be happy if they were in a race that had no idea where the finish line was, right? Like it's just you can't like motivate yourself or push yourself if you don't know what the end goal is, or if the end goal keeps moving. So setting expectations is like really important, and I can't emphasize enough this idea of holding to it. So you have to, what setting expectations does is sets a baseline requirement for a strong culture. Like it is a like a kind of a social contract agreement across all groups, or maybe even stronger than a social contract. It might actually be in your contract, right? Or in your job description, on like what it takes and what your responsibilities are to hold the team together and to build up this company, to build that culture. And it is always happening. So these expectations can come through a lot of different ways, right? They could be like, what time are you at work? How long are you working? Like what are you supposed to do? What are you held accountable to? And we'll talk about accountability here in a little bit, but these baseline expectations are a little bit different than accountability. Expectations are a lot more of the what, and accountability is a lot more of the how, right? But it's so important to make sure that these expectations are not only set, but that they are communicated and recommunicated and that your team is enabled. Sales leaders, just having quota does not count as like setting expectations. Expectations goes much deeper than that. Their quota can be $1 million, and that's great, but there's so much more behind that quota and what they need to get to that goal, that if you want to build that strong motivational culture, you need to dive into that and what different behaviors or things you expect them to do to reach that $1 million quota.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Taylor.
I'm wondering how you like the best practices for communicating these expectations. I don't know if you're going to talk about this later or not, but I'm so curious if you've got specific ways that you really make sure that this gets through.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good comment there. So as you can see in my like triple educate here at the bottom, I think that education has to happen across the board all the time. So where that happens, I mean, different companies are going to be different depending on size, resources, et cetera. But the one thing that should never change is management one-on-ones, right? So whether you're a company of 5 people or a company of 10 people, you should be revisiting these expectations in almost every single one-on-one in some extent, right? Like if you have a whole bunch of different expectations, some of them are going to go without saying. Like I do think like showing up to work on time probably goes without saying unless you're not doing it. And then you'll be held accountable for that. And that's when this comes there. But like setting the expectations doesn't even need to feel like it's a baseline conversation. It can really be focused on the future, right? So like what does it take for them to get to that next level? What do you expect from them? What are the building blocks to building a successful career in that organization or in their life? Those are all great ways to bring up those expectations. I think a lot of the times having core values, or like at Spiff, we actually don't have core values. We have kind of a core vision, and those core visions actually have that. I mean, those same expectations on like what you're doing as you join Spiff, right? So I think it can be communicated a lot of ways. I think like the main thing is like you just have to communicate, and there's like I don't know. I was going to say there's no such thing as over communication. There probably is, but like for things like expectations, you can't over communicate that. Like if you have that in a weekly newsletter somewhere, again, you don't need to be like list of expectations and bullet list it, but making sure that your team, your coworkers know what to expect out of each other is so important.
Yeah, I like that. I also like what you said about it being core to your one-on-ones. And someone had actually asked this, I think you just answered it in Reg. They were asking how to set self-improvement expectations, but you just answered it. If it's like holding that accountability and it's constantly over communicating those things, and it's connecting their self-improvement with the core vision, maybe not the core values of what you already have. So that's awesome. And we answered a Reg question. So cool.
That's perfect. We're in sync then. Yeah, it's actually super interesting. I'll talk a little bit more about this on the accountability, but as I was prepping for this and doing research, there's a study out there that showed that if these expectations are written down or communicated, it ups the possibility of them being met by 95%, which is like pretty intense of an up, right? So the fact that like if you're sharing this in your and like side note and like +1 for making sure you write these things down as a manager and like consistently follow up on them. But if you're like consistently talking about these expectations, and this doesn't have to be one way. I mean, I'm talking a lot about like company expectations, but like this could also be towards the manager from someone on their team, right? So like your reps, your CS team, whoever could have expectations for other people. Like I have expectations for my for who I report to, right? It's just like they have expectations for me. And it's a mutual agreement across the board, and those should be communicated.
Awesome. Love that. Do you want to dive into accountability?
Yeah, let's dive into everyone's favorite part, accountability, right? So with this, I actually have been rereading Extreme Ownership. So I know there's some lovers and some haters of the book Extreme Ownership. A huge fan of it if everyone wants to take a read. Total like unpaid plug there on their book. But it's an amazing, it talks a lot about accountability. And I want to make sure that we're flipping the word accountability oftentimes has like a negative connotation to it, right? Like you need to hold people accountable. You need to like tell people what to do. You need to make sure that you're like on them and making sure, where that is like the exact opposite of what accountability should actually be. that type of accountability should only be in play when you have people who are underperforming, who are not holding those standards or keeping those or don't understand those expectations. It's also a style for bad management. So there are times when you have to do it. You can't get around it, where you have to get on people for not keeping their goals. But accountability is much different from that. And it actually helps someone that you probably aren't thinking about. So believe it or not, accountability is most beneficial for your top performers. I think a lot of the times we feel like we have to keep our low performers accountable. And we do. I'm not saying we don't. But that accountability actually is going to drive your top performers to be the top performers. If you take out accountability, or you're moving that line, or the expectations that you're setting for people, you are hurting your top performers way more than you're hurting your bottom performers. Because what are they working towards, right? What does success look like? Your top performers are the ones who care. They're the ones who stay up at night, who work extra to try to figure this out. Your motivation is built off of a good balance of expectations and accountability towards those expectations. So if you want people to be motivated, you want people to have that drive to hit that next level, there has to be and I put constant in there as I don't want to skip over that, a constant sense of accountability on your team, whether that's in between the your reps or your whoever keeping themselves accountable, whether it's over your managers keeping themselves accountable. And also just from the top down, the CEO should be kept accountable. And as a team, it's a cyclical thing, accountability. So it's really important. And I want to dive into real-time feedback here in a second, and actually give some action items that you can take on this. But Taylor, curious on your thoughts on just this. I know accountability is an interesting word, and it's way over, well, it's not overused, but I think it's oftentimes misunderstood and overused in the wrong context. But
yes.
What are your thoughts there?
Oh, I thought that was fantastic, because we got a lot of registration questions about, okay, how are you motivating your lowest performers, right? That's a pretty common question. But you're saying it's kind of top down. Am I getting that right?
Yes, yeah. So and it doesn't have hopefully it's a a chain effect, right? I guess where you're going to see as you're first off, common mistake is focusing so much on your bottom performers that you neglect your top performers. So always keep that in mind. Second, if you're finding ways to build a good culture of motivation in your organization, for it will give people a roadmap on what they need to do to get there. It'll prove to you that you actually have a system that works, right? So that you know that you're not the one who's not helping them hit goals, it's them. And then that'll give you a couple things. One, it'll help, again, it'll make it easier for you to re-hit those expectations, focus on the accountability of those lower performers, and help them either opt in or opt out. And it is hard of a conversation as that could be. One thing to always keep in mind is that if you're really moving things around to try to help your bottom performers, not only are you hurting them, because they're not succeeding and probably not in a spot where they will succeed. And I guess I'm being a little bit general there. But you're also hurting your top performers, because you're adjusting what accountability and expectations look like across the board. Wow. Right. So it's important to remember that has a chain effect, whether it's negative or positive. And that not everyone is built to succeed the same. And at the same place, sorry. Everyone has the opportunity to succeed 100%. But sometimes people there's people who aren't great at selling a certain software, or don't work great at selling a certain cycle. There's some people who need to switch departments or roles, and sometimes that's internal, sometimes that needs to happen external, but no one likes being an underperformer. No one enjoys scraping the bottom. And so if we can't find a way to get them up, then let's find a really healthy way to get them out, and so that they're happier, the team is healthier, and that you're, again, more focused on your top performers.
I love that. And someone just asked a question in our chat. They said, do you have any best practices to manage accountability from the bottom up? For example, holding members of your exec team accountable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we actually just re-implemented this process at Spiff. So blind 365 reviews are a great way to do this. So again, those expectations need to be set, and it takes the right leadership team who's willing and ready to do that. But if you can add that real transparency into that feedback and give people an opportunity to skip levels and give that feedback to them, that's great. I'm a big fan of kind of like, and it's happening more and more now, but with the fact like vulnerable CEOs and management teams that are sitting either in like in the bullpens or at least close to the bullpen. So you're decreasing. I mean, we're virtual now, so keep that in mind. But like basically where they're not untouchable, where you can actually reach them. And opening up that feedback loop. Our CEO is amazing at this. He's consistent, like constantly looking for that feedback and looking to be held accountable, and is very like vocal when he feels like he's fallen short. Not in a way to like decrease our confidence in him, but actually to increase the fact that he's aware and he's like showing ownership over that. We also have a couple different ways for people to, again, to anonymously give feedback so they feel comfortable with that throughout the organization. So I think that there's a few different ways. I do think this is something you just kind of have to ingrain in your culture. Again, like, what do you expect from me? What you should expect from me and what I expect from you should be something that you're having these conversations on pretty consistently.
Awesome. Thank you. I remember we did something, I think it was back in March, on transparency for motivation. And you're touching on that here, right? Like, you've got to be transparent about your culture, but it's also increasing this feedback loop that you have with one another. Cool. Do you want to do anything else on accountability, or
yeah, so I think one thing I want to hit on is, like, we kind of skipped over this thing about real-time feedback. This is something that like I think is especially pertinent right now, because in the past, like especially in some, like I kind of am focusing a little bit on like sales organizations right now, but it doesn't have to be that. But in the past, when you're working from an office, it was really easy to hold people accountable like right away, whether that's good or bad, right? Like whether it's like, hey, you didn't do something, or hey, you did something awesome, let's celebrate this. Like for like a good example that's like really easy to relate to for most people is like BDRs, SDRs, right? Like a lot of the times you have this bullpen. Everyone's making calls, sending emails, working hard. It's really easy for you to go tap on their shoulder and to give them something in real time. Like, hey, you just listened to a call. Let me go tap on your shoulder. Let's talk about it. It's important to realize that you don't have to lose that in this virtual world, right? So one thing that I would definitely suggest to everyone on this call is doing, who's trying to build like a better culture of motivation. Sorry, joking over my own words here. Is go take a look at your tech stack, and I guarantee you there are tools or features inside of there that you aren't utilizing today to make this feedback real time, whether you have to be the one initiating it or the software does it itself, right? So like this isn't a plug for Spiff software, but again, Spiff is like, there's lots of softwares like Spiff too that are providing real-time feedback on commission structures. Salesforce is great at providing pretty real-time feedback on different metrics, right? So many things are connected into Salesforce. Gong, Chorus, I mean, there's a whole, we use Boost Up internally as well. There's so many different tools. Plug for Atrium in there for our good friend Pete is a great spot to get real-time feedback. Like, there's so many ways that you can enable your team to keep themselves accountable by using your tech stack. So on this like topic, if anyone actually wants to talk specifics on that, I'm happy to dive in. Would love to chat with anyone on that. But make sure you're utilizing the tools that you have, because the baseline for accountability and like the problem, like when someone comes down and says, hey, you need to hold your team more accountable, the first thing they need to do is look inward and make sure that their team even understands what they're being held accountable against, right? So do they understand what the expectations are? Do they understand how to like meet these needs? Like if their quota is $1 million, do they understand like what that means? Like, yeah, they know they need to close $1 million, but do they understand how to sell the product that they're given? Like, there's so many things that you need to check on and make sure there. And the tech stacks that you have, especially like what we have today, there is always, like, I don't know that I've ever seen an example of someone who's completely utilizing their entire tech stack of all the features that can be used, right?
That's awesome. Love that you just brought it back to being really simple. Do you even know what your expectations are? All right. Do you want to move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Here we go.
So yeah, reward and recognize. So this one, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here, but I want to talk about a few things. Like, it's right now, it's a big topic, right? Intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards, like what really motivates people, what's external. Like, you're going to see a lot of times like experiences pop up. Big fan of experiences, big fan of money. Your comp plans, spiffs right there, like, etc., are things that you can really do to reward people. But what I want to talk about mostly is like how you recognize these people. So it's important to like understand that like your rewards that you're giving people, or like the money that you're paying people, is only as good, is only as worth like the meaning that's behind it, right? So if your people are getting a bonus and they have no idea why they're getting that bonus, you can't expect to build this culture of motivation because they don't know why they're getting paid what they're getting paid. If someone gets a gift card somewhere, and like that's great, they get to go take a family out to a nice, like their significant other out to a nice dinner. That's awesome, but like, do they understand why they did it? And is it going to be something that's scalable and repeatable? You should have, even if it's a spot bonus, that doesn't mean you can't have strategy behind it, right? So again, we have those expectations. We have a culture of accountability. We now need to make sure we reward and recognize the right behaviors to continue to push that forward. And that's what's going to motivate people. Different people are motivated by different things. But in general, top performers are motivated people, and human beings in general are motivated, right? Like it's part of being, of living, is there's a motivation baked in there somewhere. You just have to learn how to unlock it. So you just always, again, want to make sure that like, again, keep it consistent. Nothing is worse than spiffs that never get paid out, right? Or like a comp plan that has like this piece of the rule that's talked about and then just ignored and that you can't explain. It's really tough to build a culture of motivation when like you're not rewarding and recognizing people that deserve it. And also, well, again, like a lot of the time we really focus on our bottom, like our underperformers, on how we're going to get them to do it. We'll do something like, I'll go up to another performer and be like, hey, if you hit this number, I'll give you a $50 gift card to wherever. Like, again, something you need to weigh out. That's not necessarily a bad way to do it, but make sure that you're making it consistent, that you're also not leaving out your top performers and focusing on them and making sure they continue to blow it out of the water. And something that's often, like, again, if we're talking about building a culture, building a team culture of recognition is just as important. So making sure that you're helping others recognize others as well. That's one of the things at Spiff that we've tried really hard to do, where inside Slack, we have a spot for people to call out other people on the team for great things they've done. It's a great way to like get a feel for like what's going on. It's a great piece of camaraderie for the team, and it really helps instill that culture of motivation. People like being recognized. Some people like being recognized different than others. It's important to make sure that you're doing your research on that and getting to know your people, especially if you're a manager of a smaller team. It's much harder as like a VP of sales over an entire organization, much easier as like a team lead over 5 people. Like really try to find ways to motivate those individual people. Try to get ways to motivate people or find ways to motivate people on your, like inside of your team, have them motivate each other, recognize each other. And again, make sure you're recognizing and rewarding the right behaviors, not the wrong behaviors. Easier, like sometimes that seems like it goes without saying, but you'd be surprised how often we see people who are building comp plans or who are rewarding behaviors that are actually sometimes like I guess counterintuitive is not the right word, but it kind of goes against what you're actually trying to achieve, right? If you're trying to build a great business and you're over incentivizing just closing deals, doesn't necessarily mean that you're setting yourself up for success, because you're rewarding reps for just pushing things through the pipe. Now, like, granted, that's good. There just needs to be some checks and balances in place to make sure that you're doing it correctly. But I don't know, like, especially on like this topic, Taylor, I'm trying to stay pretty high level on it, especially as we're kind of pushing towards time here. But anything like you'd like to dive deeper into?
I love what you said about having strategy behind your rewards and kind of making sure that they're tied back to your expectations. Is that something like, how do you hold yourself accountable for doing that? Or like, what's the strategy for that?
Yeah. So I think when you give a reward, you need to think about like, not just how does this help me today, but how does it help me tomorrow? Right? Or not me, or how does it help my team or organization? Like when I was in college, I was a sales manager of a call center team. And it was like really easy to like, we used to do something that actually worked super well, where it was like, rather than give money, we gave time off the phones. Right. So we'd be like, hey, the top performers over this next hour, we're going to pull off the phone and we're going to go like play Mario Kart or something. Like, love Mario Kart. Anyways, so that was like really helpful for us. And what was helpful is that it was consistent, and it was something that became like something people looked forward to. And so it was just a little bit less random than like, hey, my goal for today is 5 meetings booked. Like, I'm going to just throw $100 at it to see if I can get those booked. Like you got to think about tomorrow too, and the next day, like what type of like motivation or what type of culture am I building around this? Am I focusing on the big picture? Am I focusing on just like this individual action? Is that right? Like we don't need to overthink it. And I'm not trying to say that like those are necessarily bad. Like there's different organizations where like sometimes it is a day by day, it's very transactional. And so like you just need to hit that number, and that's great. But make sure that you're thinking it through. Make sure that it's not random. Have purpose behind everything you do.
I love that. It definitely sounds fun to me, and I don't even work there, but it's like motivating me to want to go play Mario Kart now.
Perfect. Yeah, awesome. I'm down for some Mario Kart.
Anything else on reward and recognize?
No, I mean, I think I would love to. I think, do we want to do kind of like circling it all up right now, or do we want to go to Q&A and then circle it up after?
Let's do some Q&A, because I think there are some great questions that kind of relate to what we were talking about earlier, and we got a question. Someone wanted to know, how do you balance offering time off when you need folks to be working and even overperforming?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. And it's kind of hard to, I'm going to give like probably a general response to that. And it's without knowing like the specifics of like your cues or what the job is or what that looks like. It's a little tough to get like really prescriptive, but one, you have to make sure you do have to make sure you're keeping that core business rolling. Like when I was at that same call center, we gave like, we would give time off or time off the phones or whatever as a reward, but then we'd get hit with the queues and have bad service levels, right? And so it was something you definitely had to balance. You had to plan for. That would probably be my biggest thing, I would say, is like giving time off is really powerful. It's a great thing. And it's like oftentimes a lot more meaningful than like sending someone home early or letting them take some time off, or even giving them a day off and paying them for it can be so much more powerful than like giving someone $100, or like, which, I mean, $100 is probably pretty equal to what you potentially lose in that day if you pay for the time off. But like oftentimes it can actually be less expensive. But I would just say like, you just need to make sure you plan that with your team, with your workforce management, making sure you're thinking that through. And again, hopefully in like an idealistic way too, if your team is really bought in and there's that team culture, that team motivation, you should be able to like get people around the fact that like you need people on the phones or overperforming, or reward the overperformers more for that, right? Like find ways to reward the people who are staying on the phone, so who are staying later or doing whatever you're trying to do there to overperform. Make sure that they're getting rewarded for that and recognized for that. And I think that there's a few ways you can bend your culture to like really kind of keep that in check. But again, happy to talk more offline on it. I'm definitely not like the world's utmost expert on that, but happy to give you some examples and thoughts.
Awesome. Something I definitely wanted to touch on here is because the reason that we started talking about building a culture of motivation is just because it's the pandemic. It's been so hard with people working remotely. It's kind of monotonous. Even if we're talking about time off, like we're still, at home. How are you using all of these techniques that you've talked about today and making sure that you're building that culture remotely? And I know you talked a little bit about the tech stack and using these virtual things, but what else have you seen that works?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. And Taylor, I broke my promise. I was totally planning on kind of weaving that more into the conversation. So I think there's a few things. I know we already talked about it, but use your tech stack that you have. Make sure that and maybe in ways that you're not thinking about it, like force people to mute Slack at a certain time. Get after people if they're on vacation and on Slack or Teams or whatever you're using to communicate. Make sure that you again are providing like the feedback that they need real time. There is an element of things that I think that we miss from the in-work environment that you don't always realize, which is just the fact of like keeping people motivated, keeping people accountable, having in those water cooler conversations, doing those things in person that kind of come up ad hoc. There are ways to kind of still have those happen, like open one-on-ones, have more all-hand meetings, at least on your teams. And then as far as like rewards and recognize, and even accountability, like I can make sure that you are keeping in perspective the situation that people are in. It's not as bad as it was at the beginning of COVID. Like childcare was one that we definitely struggled with earlier when like daycares were closing and stuff, like people were having a really tough time managing their work and their family more than they really ever had before. Make sure you're aware of that, and yeah, you just utilize what you have, and be aware that like Zoom fatigue is real. Recognize it. Make sure you're being proactive about it. And I think that's really important. Like the worst thing you can do is get reactive in a virtual environment. You need to be proactive and looking for ways to improve all the time on how you manage your people.
Love that. Okay, I think that's something that is also really relevant for a lot of folks right now is the job market and how wild it's been, and retention is a huge thing for folks. And we're talking about that at the summit, which you will be doing our masterclass for. But how have you seen that change? Like how important is motivation now, and kind of what are you doing to help with that retention as folks are starting to leave a lot more?
Yeah, the good old great resignation, right? So so it's funny, we actually just read an article on this, and I think there's a few things you could do. One, like for better or for worse, compensation will play a role in this, right? So like you can't, when the job market is so flushed like it is right now, you need to make sure that you're paying your people fairly, and like can't like emphasize enough that they understand how they're getting paid. So like most of the time people get paid fairly similarly in different scenarios, but you need to remember like they need to understand how that they get paid and why they get paid, when they get paid. Like make sure you're breaking that down for them. Also, like I think there's something to be said that like attrition will ebb and flow with the market always, and there's not always a ton that you can do about it. But if you're building a good like culture of accountability, expectations, and you're rewarding, like you're not going to give them a lot of great excuses to leave, especially if you're paying a competitive salary or comp plan. Like if people feel like they're heard, people have that voice, those are the companies that are actually grabbing these people right now rather than losing them. I think you're seeing a lot of people leaving bigger organizations. They're getting a little more like interested in some of these like smaller companies. I think you're seeing a transition from some of these smaller companies to ones who are a little bit bigger, who feel like they kind of nailed down this motivation a little bit better, or this culture a little bit better. And it's very unique to the individual who's leaving or the individual who's thinking about leaving. But like you got to check off all the boxes that you can do. Make sure your people feel enabled, make sure they feel motivated, that they understand what their expectations are, and that you're holding everybody accountable. Again, like that accountability thing, it's like oftentimes taken a negative connotation and it can be double-edged, right? But at the same point, if the team feels like together, they're going to push harder, and people aren't going to want to leave, right? Like people generally don't quit a team they like being on.
Yes, exactly. I love when you said people are going towards companies that kind of have a voice. That's very important for us, especially the millennials. We're always looking for that impact.
Yep, totally.
Sean asked the question, what are some important things a new leader should consider when building a culture of motivation that's already into existing team? I think that's an awesome question.
Yeah, I love it. And Sean, the one thing that I always try to do it, and maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is I love when I get a new team or I hire a new team to sit down with them and just open the floor and say, cool, this is what you guys should expect of me. This is what I expect of you. This is our goal. This is what we're working towards. Like, how do we get there? And just, you want to create like the transparency, the ownership, that whole like cycle to me is just so important, and creates like a really good, healthy sense of camaraderie on your group. So there's generally only so much you can control, but on your team, even if it's part of an existing team, creating like that continuity, creating that like excitement there. And like, it's often really helpful to even hit like a reset button, depending on the situation that you're going into. I just love to open up the floor, be vulnerable. And again, go like, I'm not trying to like necessarily preach here, but like make sure everyone understands what you expect of them, what they expect of you, should expect of you, figure out how they're going to hold you accountable to that. And then like talk about what's coming up, get people excited, find ways for them to work together.
That's awesome. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I think we can do our wrap up slide. What do you think?
Let's do it. So I want to point, so for better or for worse, I'm a big Steve Jobs fan, and I know that comes with like some some baked issues in there, right? Probably tells a lot about the type of person I am. But do I believe that Steve Jobs was like a nice person to work for? Like, not at all. Like, and again, like I'm not like personally a huge Elon Musk fan. But I just finished reading his biography a little bit ago, actually. And something that's really interesting about these like kind of ruthless CEOs is they had really high retention rates in their companies. They built great things, even though they were treated poorly. Now, I do not think you need to treat people poorly and to work people to the bone to create a motivated team. What you need is a sense of teamwork, camaraderie, and a culture of motivation to keep people there. And you get that by, again, studying these things. Are you communicating the fact of what your vision is? Are you creating a team mentality? Like, I don't care who wants to like argue this other point with like this lasting relationships thing, excuse me. But like, I don't know, Google, Apple, like when I'm in the Bay, there's people like, I don't know how many times I meet someone's like, hey, we used to work at Apple together. And it's just like, it's something that like, sometimes you don't realize it at the time. It can feel really brutal at different times, but like, these people felt and they built these great companies, even though they were hard to work with. And that's why. Now, again, no excuse. People should not feel like they have to work 80-hour weeks to survive at a company. And they shouldn't feel like they kind of hate their job, but kind of love it at the same time. You can have a best of both worlds here. Like, if you're setting expectations, you're being vulnerable, your company is holding each other accountable, and that you're rewarding and recognizing the right things, you're going to create this concept of motivation that's because you're working towards a similar goal, a similar purpose. And that's why people are going to stay. That's why people are going to become top performers for you. And there's so much more there that I'd like love to dive into. But as far as like my last words on that is like, take a good like self-reflection moment, I guess, or like go through and look at how you're running your teams, how your company's running. And actually ask yourself, like, do I understand the expectations that I'm setting or that are set for me? Am I being held accountable? Or am I holding my teams accountable? And am I rewarding and recognizing correctly? Those three different things can make a world of difference for you, even if you just up one of them, right? Like, just pick one. Like, are my expectations written down somewhere? Are we like using our tech stack to hold people accountable? Am I having like consistent one-on-ones with my people? Am I thinking about tomorrow when I'm rewarding my team? Right. So some great things to keep in mind. Again, I won't try to let the Apple and Tesla references take too much from that, but I wanted to make sure I pointed it out that it's not just like these like Silicon Valley companies that have all the like restaurants. Like, I was actually in Mountain View yesterday and drove through the Googleplex, right? Like, you don't have to have all these restaurants and sports teams to have a great culture of motivation. You can do it by just working hard and kind of following these different steps.
That's awesome. Mic drop. I think
Boom.
we'll end it right there. That's fantastic.
Okay.
We've got everything we need for a culture of motivation. Thank you so much, Tanner. This is fantastic. I'm going to be using this stuff myself. Thank you, everyone, for attending today in the middle of the day. I know it's probably a busy week for most, but we appreciate you attending. Thank you to Spiff for sponsoring this event. We will see you all at our upcoming event soon, and we hope to see you at the summit where you can catch Tanner again for his masterclass. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.